All right, Numbers 33, let's call this one barbs because it comes out of the end of the chapter where God is warning the children of Israel what will happen if they are not thorough in cleansing the land of the old inhabitants who had defiled it and are now being, for lack of a better term, evicted because of the ways in which they defiled the land. And we mentioned before that death is one of the things that can defile, especially when it is not atoned for with justice. And in Leviticus and again in Deuteronomy, we're going to see how one of the things that some of the inhabitants of the land had gotten in the practice of was child sacrifice. And so that unatoned for death, we're going to see in Numbers 35, can defile the land. And so not only are the Israelites going to be warned about the need to avoid unrighteousness, especially unrighteousness insofar as it involves murder, but more importantly, they're going to have to cleanse the land of all of the toxins, for lack of a better term, that have defiled it. And so as we have seen in the story of Balaam, we haven't talked a lot about Numbers organizationally, but that story of the talking donkey warning the man of God who was actually going to counsel Balak, an enemy of God, into the ways of causing the people of God to stumble, that really is kind of like a hinge story because it's going to require this next generation that actually is going to enter the promised land to do some recovery before they are ready to move forward. And that really, in a lot of ways, started back with what we saw in chapter 31, where they were told to take vengeance on the Midianites, understanding that they needed to be thorough in not leaving any of the people who could again cause them to stumble. There were very few people they could leave alive going forward if they were going to succeed after the battle and win over Midian. Then in the next chapter, as they began to see how great the land was, even before they got into the promised land, those tribes that wanted to stop short, Moses was going to warn the entire congregation needed to be unified in taking the promised land and clearing it out of all of those toxins that could cause the children of Israel to stumble, just like the people who were getting evicted ahead of them. And so they needed to be thorough in all collectively committing to cleaning out the land of promise. And then finally here in this chapter 33, unfortunately, it's telling us the story once again of Aaron's death, but it is talking about how going forward they need to be thorough, not simply in clearing out the people, but in clearing out anything that could potentially cause them to stumble down the same path of, like we said, the folks who are getting evicted ahead of them. And that is where we pick up in chapter 33, verse 52, where it reads, "Then you shall drive out all the inhabitants of the land from before you, and you shall destroy all their figured stones and destroy all their metal images and destroy all their high places." And in verse 55, he's going to tell them the consequences if they choose not to. Where it reads, "But if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then those of them whom you let remain shall be as barbs in your eyes and thorns in your sides, and they shall trouble you in the land where you dwell." Verse 56 is going to go further to say, "And I will do to you as I thought to do to them." It's kind of a double-edged passage. One, it's good to understand that God is fair, meaning he's going to apply one standard, and it's a standard of conduct, not of personality, meaning it's not just because it's the children of Israel that they're going to get a pass on what's going on in the new land. If they engage in the same patterns of behavior as the people who were evicted before them, they're going to get evicted too. But the tragedy is in wasted opportunities, and in many ways, I think that is at least one personal takeaway that we, or at least I, can take away from this lesson. Understanding that Jesus, when he taught the Sermon on the Mount, he seems to have revisited a number of the 10 commandments, saying murder doesn't start with the killing. Murder starts with an unresolved bitterness in my heart. Adultery doesn't start with the act of actually adulterating. It starts with an unchecked lust, so on and so forth. And even with healthy things, there are otherwise healthy things. I'm a truth seeker. There are things I need to investigate to find out whether or not the things I'm saying are true or false. But I am not always emotionally ready for even the truth. There are some times when I am simply frustrated or tired, exhausted, whatever, and I'm not ready to handle it. And instead of being blessed by the truth, I can be set off down a path that can require damage control in a situation where I could otherwise simply be moving forward. So my prayer for you is my prayer for me. Not only that we take God's advice to be thorough in removing temptations in the form of unhealthy things, but that we are wise in the way that we deal with even healthy things brought to us in unhealthy situations. Because my prayer for you is my prayer for me, that we be able to simply move forward and avoid the barbs that will require us to do damage control in situations where we could otherwise simply be making progress.